I hear it. And this dude's a crook. He likes to rip people off, families especially. I got it on video, him returning my property. It's on Facebook, all over the place. Total thief. Took 2 water heaters and a dryer. Really? I live there and I have the deed to it. Get your facts straight. Why are you in front of my fucking house anyway? It's fucking harassment.
Sure, I want to talk to you.
Why? What, are you a cop? You gonna screw with me?
Yeah, sure am.
Why? What'd I do?
You're under arrest for breach of key.
Aubrey!
You cannot.
Hello, this is All Points TV, and this is John from All Points TV, and we're welcoming to the studio a man who hasn't been here for quite a long time, Adam Gerics. How you doing, Adam?
Hi.
So anyway, we just showed the video that was shot in 2013, correct?
That's right.
And so that was some time ago. We're going to go into why that was shot and the story behind it, and also maybe how it was the outcome. So anyway, welcome to the studio, and let's begin, I guess.
Okay. Well, let me tell you what brings me here.
Yeah, go, sure.
Well, first off, I'm officially a write-in candidate for Genesee County Prosecutor for this fall's election, and this is I've been signed up as a write-in candidate for just under a year, but I haven't really done anything about it because I've kept quiet due to some of the circumstances that surround that video up to this point. So that's primarily what brings me here, but there's a few other issues that we're going to get into. So
Yeah, now, what was the story behind that story? I mean, why don't we go? We got quite a bit of a history there, I think. So I think people have also kind of explained why. And we're going to bring this point up really from the onset. You're not a lawyer.
Right.
So, I mean, you're running for prosecutor, which most people would think that would have to go hand in hand to be a prosecutor, is to be an attorney with years of practice. But we'll go into that later.
Okay.
So how did this come about? How did we get to that point where that video was shot? Why don't we start there?
Okay, well, I guess the shortest version for now is that most people know me from activism that I did in Carriagetown, surrounding the historic district and the issues that were related with Hurley and them neglecting to preserve or even participate in the community. And a lot of people, I have some people that like what I did, and of course I have haters like everybody else does, and I think the haters in Carriagetown were probably about as corrupt as some of the other people we're going to end up talking about. But because actually one of the people in that video was the president of the Carriagetown Historic Neighborhood Association at the time, Tim Monahan, the tall, skinny guy. The shorter guy with the beard was the cop. That summer was probably like the culmination of a few things. We had done a lot of anonymous activism, protests and rallies and some online stuff, and we'd also been fighting Hurley up to the point where that area got cut out of Carriagetown's historic district, and which is what eventually subsequently allowed Kettering and Hurley to come in and tear down what they wanted to tear down for 20 years. So there was sort of like a turn toward the Carriagetown leadership being on their side, the people that they were against for so long. But they have their own little private interests and things that have gone on in Carriagetown where they participated in abusing like local authority and power based on who they know or friends or whatever. And I was sort of an adversary, I guess, in that mix because I didn't agree with them and I didn't agree with what was going on with Hurley. And since my property was right smack in the middle where Hurley and Kettering wanted to tear everything down, I guess I became the thorn in everybody's side. And so Tim Monahan participated in this, which ends up being a pretty lengthy conspiracy on targeting me. I'm not sure if it was just to get me out of Carriagetown or just out of the vindictive nature of things and how people can be and how the abuse of power actually can happen really easily, especially with cops that don't really care about doing their job with any morality or any sort of logical understanding of what they're actually supposed to do. And that's what this arrest amounts to is rumor mills and personal hatreds culminating into what's ended up being an unconstitutional arrest. Like the cop that arrested me, we found out later through testimony in Judge Drain's court down in Detroit that he had lied, perjured himself to get the warrant to arrest me that day. So they were coming down there to goad me, they thought, into doing something that would justify them putting an arrest on me. And I happened to be videotaping it from my front yard, and I already kind of knew what the hell was going on, which is why you hear me chuckle in the video here and there. And then just I guess most people would be flabbergasted, but I was more or less laughing about it when he said he was arresting me for breach of peace because I'm an asshole, which is just so demonstrates exactly why I feel like it doesn't really matter what political position you run for. This is the kind of corruption that you got to deal with besides the stuff that sparks news stories, of violence and death at the hands of police. There's such a broader context of I guess, ignorant, petty corruption that ends up affecting people's lives in such a longer period of time than is necessary, whether it's stupid jail time for something extremely minor or these sweeps for child support that end up costing us more money than actually garnering any money for the children they're supposedly protecting. I mean, it just goes on, and this is just a prime example. And I have more video from a different incident that's sort of the same thing. It's a prime example of how these cops do abuse their power on such a broad scale that, in order to deal with that and the issues of defunding the police and everything, you would need prosecutors or sheriffs or public officials that actually do focus on those issues instead of just putting lip service to it. Because one thing that always gets me about a prosecutor, say like Layton, is that they really don't do much of anything, and from what I understand, he's barely spent any time in court. There was a period where he did because they supposedly had budgetary issues, but for the most part, it's a political position. They get to decide. They can decline to prosecute. They have such broad leeway to do so many things. Some offices have investigative powers that we've never seen Layton really use, but what you always see with these prosecutors is that they get all highfalutin when there's a high-profile case that took place. And I also want to mention to you before I forget that this prosecutor's office is sort of an installation that took over where the population used to be able to bring their own complaints to court and act as their own prosecutor, which I think is very important that should be discussed and looked at, in terms of all this defund the police and reformation of law and order and all that. Because it's a prime example of how citizens used to be able to directly participate when a crime took place against them, that they had the right. They didn't have to ask a prosecutor that probably wouldn't do anything for them anyway because it wasn't important enough. They had the right to file a complaint themselves and didn't have to fight through all the hogwash that you have to do, nowadays when local cops don't want to enforce something that took place or don't even want to look in that direction because they know it's too much work for them and it's more about them doing work than actually enforcing the law. Or the biggest one yet that nobody's really tackled is all of the rape test kits that have never been touched, that probably have degraded to the point where they can't use for prosecution. So I mean, that video him arresting me because I was videotaping him, which is essentially all it is just a minor prime example of why I would want to take the prosecutor's seat. I would like to change the paradigm and have it focus more on other issues than what is typically perceived as these prosecutors doing, relying strictly on murder and high-profile cases to keep their images up,
No, I think you bring a few interesting points that I wasn't aware of. We were talking before we started this conversation. We're now recording. For one thing, the prosecutor's office was not originally intended, according to what you're telling me, because I've never read that part of it. But the only best representation I could see, and it's probably very inaccurate. But when I was watching TV shows of the out west, they would have somebody, the local sheriff, the marshal, whatever, would bound somebody over for trial, and a visiting judge would make an appearance, because a lot of times there wasn't, a seated judge in that county or district or territory a lot of times, because these are TV shows.
Right.
And then they would have to bring, and it would be totally upon the marshal, the sheriff, to decide the course of action, what kind of prosecution be sought, and of course they'd have to appoint the jury from that pool, and also that stuff. And they also, I guess you're right. I'm gonna have to look this up because I'm not questioning it, but I just for my own personal edification.
Without getting all heady about it, I guess it goes back to old British law and
British.
led into how we operated.
Right.
Eventually, over time, we kind of lost that right, and it's become an institution of its own self that, like I said, has the discretionary power to enforce something or not enforce something, or investigate something, not investigate something. So I would love to say, yeah, this person did this to me. I'm filing these papers. I'm going to prove to you that this happened and it was done to me. A prosecutor won't do that for you necessarily.
See, that's interesting. If I'd like to do more research in this field because I was unaware of it. I had procedural law classes at Amat, and I also did 9 years as a probation caseworker for a volunteer for juvenile offenders, first-time juvenile offenders. And so I had to know about basis of understanding of the criminal court system and also and how it dealt with the juvenile offenders, basically. But I also knew about the basic cases about evidence and the role and what could be arrested for, the issues of warrant, all that stuff. I knew that. So this part is like a kind of eye-opening, and it's usually good because when you find out stuff and you pursue it, you find a lot of times a lot of your assumptions have to go by the wayside. But I also like the point that you brought up too, people not wanting to do their jobs, not do a follow through, and also being very selective in when they're going to do the duties they're assigned to is also a form of corruption. It's not always about a thing of money being passed underneath the table or meeting in a secret spot to pass the cash.
Right.
And there's different forms of corruption.
That was the term we coined in Carriage Town. Those of us that were aware of this and on the raw end of the stick all the time is selective enforcement. So totally selective. Whether or not we like you, whether or not we know the people that are in this case in the neighborhood that we like or side with. There was a Flint cop that ended up being a good buddy of mine that, at first was sort of, directed to come and harass me early on when I first moved into Carriage Town. And then as we became friends and I sat in the back of his car 2 or 3 times, he realized that he was being used to bully me, to try to, scare me out of the neighborhood or whatever. And from that point on, he had actually asked for my forgiveness and, apologized. And we've been friends since, and have done a few things together over time in regards to Carriage Town, so
that's encouraging because I have issues with cops, and the thing is the suburbanite mentality, which I'm not a member of. Okay, they have a tendency to think, well, if you don't do anything wrong, you're never going to run afoul of the police, which is a load of crap.
Right.
Okay, and then when you see these same people, or I call them badge kissers because basically it's like the adoration of people in blue. I see people as they are. I've seen cops who are total dirtbags.
Totally.
Okay, and I told you some of those stories. Maybe we'll go into them on here, but
I got some as we move on. I have some, what I just mentioned, though, it's not even an experience that I didn't get on video that I'm sharing, and it may or may not be true. I have a cop that testified that he lied to get the warrant to come and arrest me that day.
Right.
So that's that casual, selective, which also, by the way, before I forget to mention, maybe as we talk about this in the future, we'll get more detailed on it, but that should also bring into question the integrity of that cop himself and the 2 or 3 cops that were with him that arrested me that day, and whether or not they've done this to multiple other people and how many other cases might and should be overturned because of that kind of criminal behavior from detectives and police officers. You know.
So another thing, also people, if you're listening to this and you're outraged or you're disgusted with what we're saying and you think we're smearing cops, I really encourage you. We're trying to not do that. We're trying to actually be more fair-minded than you see in the major press now. I'm trying to be more of a journalist than I see from CNN, Fox, or any of the other big names. I want to encourage you to contact us through Facebook, All Points TV, and just leave me a message. I'll put in the description where you can contact the email for that. It's allpointstv@gmail.com, but I'll put it in the comments section so you can actually reach out to us. And if you want equal time to come in here and make your case about why that abuse happens or why it's not abuse or selective enforcement, please, contact me. I encourage that. But all these people I know, I post stuff, and everybody nowadays, if you criticize something that they do or somebody they're connected to does, it's like you're a hater. Yeah. Oh, you don't like me. Well, guess what? I'm an adult. I know. I walking down the street. A lot of people randomly just pass me by, decide they don't like me. They might even hate me for any reasons. Right. There's no reason a lot of times for people hating each other, but they choose to. Yeah. So you can't use that as an excuse though to actually dismiss the maybe legitimate things they're putting in front of you. So that's what they're a hater. What we're supposed to do, make sure that your friends and my friends won't get along and we just won't talk. That doesn't work in a society, especially when we talk about police.
Well, I also think that a lot of people that might end up getting on a high horse, anywhere from these anti-fascist type kids to people that just want to hate just to hate, maybe have never experienced it or don't have any involvement in the community where they would experience it, and they've just kind of been a wallflower to society or whatever. But the rest of us that have experienced it, should have a voice that's louder than, like what you said, the big headlines that come out. Believe me, what that guy did to George Floyd or whatever, or that Breonna Taylor or something, I can't remember her last name. That's like one in a list of tons and tons and tons of people that have been harmed by the police, whether it's black or white, regardless of the situation. I remember reading a statistic once, about a year or two ago, where they said that actually women of both colors were far often more brutalized by cops than black men, statistically. From everywhere from getting touched inappropriately, raped even. There was a lady in Tennessee that was shot through the eye. There's a hate all you want, but until those of us that have experienced some of the, lower forms of corruption that have just as long and intrinsic effect on your society, on your society, but on your life personally, that in some ways can be worse than being beaten to death, or if they were trying to put me in jail for 3 felonies for that day and then 17 felonies that I beat recently.
You had to go to Detroit for this. Did you? Yeah. Was it local or Detroit?
No, I was in Judge Drain's court, and I'll be totally honest. We lost the case, but it didn't matter either whether we won or not because it was going to go into appeal. And I got to say, this is where I don't like the jury system, because I guess I'm frustrated with the level of intelligence among the population to actually entrust people sometimes with decisions like that, because I'll tell you what, there was this guy on the jury that I knew was going to be a total douchebag just by the fact that he was wearing a Tool t-shirt. That just told me right then and there, this guy does not have even half a brain. He's got a shitty sense of music, you know what I'm saying? And he's going to wear that in a courtroom of all places. I knew. And it didn't matter anyway, because as a result of that part of the case, we got the testimony that we got. The officers admitting that they got a warrant, and they lied about to get the warrant. They held their hand up in court and perjured themselves in front of a judge to get a warrant. That's, undeniable. It's on the record. So now we're in appeal, and that takes 6 months to a year. And the city attorney of Flint ought to be ashamed of himself anyway for having spent however much money they've spent on this case against me. It's not like I'm some kind of gang kingpin or El Chapo or whatever. What am I? Some 2-bit piece of shit? Activist that has pissed a few people off. Yet they've spent 7 years and I don't know how much money attempting to prosecute me. So again, there's some of this corruption that's never going to get addressed because of the headlining crap that people watch, on TV or only pay attention to online in their little bubbles. When, in fact, there's a hell of a lot more going on than just the violence. And in terms of the office itself, I think that, and we were talking about this earlier, but call me an idealist, but I think that if we actually could have an ideal situation. The idea of public service, whether it's a councilman or a prosecutor or a congressman or whatever, the idea that they're involved with anything that makes them all this excessive money over us and helping to create the aristocracy they live in or thrive to be in, should be eliminated. And it shouldn't be about pay and status. It should be something that you just want to do because, you're one of a dozen or two people that's something that interests you. But we have a system set up that should have a flow so that people are cared for, the economy is cared for, and try to eliminate all this division and, racial issues and have higher education and things of that nature. Then again, call me an idealist, but I'll do the job of whatever office I run for no pay, just for the lulz, just for the hell of it, just because I can participate, I'm intelligent enough to participate, and have a perspective that maybe enough people support that we could maybe put some earnest, honest changes into the system. They always say like the altruists, like they're supposed altruists, like Melissa Mays from the water movement here in Flint or whatever, are doing it for Flint and for the residents and so on, but she's got everything monetized and she's got royalties probably from that stupid Lifetime movie that Queen Latifah was in, and they just totally whitewashed what they called a crisis by enlisting those type of people. I mean, Melissa Mays worked for the Sinclair Group for some radio show and she was promoting bands. So I mean, if that doesn't lean you in the direction that possibly she was kind of paid to do this anyway, and kind of take the crown of the water crisis activism so that they could divert any attention from any other issues and keep people on that level. I've never done anything in any of the activism I've ever done in my life that involved me getting or benefiting financially from it. In fact, I've spent tons of my own money for any campaign that I've ever put on. There's plenty of videos out there, music videos, rallies, protests, stuff like that. So I would do the job as prosecutor simply to change the paradigm. To change the focus. Like I said, you don't have to be a lawyer, and there's no requirement that says you have to be a lawyer to run for prosecutor.
Except, I was a winner there, because I know that the sheriff, which is the top officer of, law enforcement, the top cop, basically, right, in any county, you don't have to be a law enforcement officer.
Right.
And I mean, matter of fact, I was told, and I don't know if this is accurate, so and if you do hear this and I'm wrong, please let me know, but Sheriff O'Brien, he was a sheriff when I was a young kid. Mm-hmm. I understand he wasn't a law enforcement. He wasn't. Right. And there's a guy just recently, and I forget his name, and he sat right. I think Matt Kroll. Matt Kroll ran for sheriff a few years back against Pickell.
Okay.
And he wasn't a law enforcement,
huh,
but he was also a constitutionalist. And see, around Michigan, Southeast Michigan, if you want to consider it a wacko, start quoting the Constitution. I mean, because you think you're a perverse individual, you're a nutcase, a conspiracy-minded person,
right,
because what they're doing away with is they're always trying to chip away by mocking people who have those concerns. And even though you might not realize this, you're actually staying on very strong constitutional grounds.
Yeah,
for your
absolutely.
opposition. Well, I don't know if you knew, you were aware of that, because people are going to, yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's why I think it's so funny. It's like I look at this and we'll get into more of the story later, I guess. But the 2013 arrest then bleeds into a different arrest in 2017 that just so happens to have a lot of the same law enforcement personnel involved. So we end up having is like this ongoing thing, not just incidental here and there to try to cause me trouble, but to actually target and push their agenda on me to I guess get rid of me. In some cases, with what's been going on, I've had some suspicions and even worried about my safety. Because Flint cops especially there is a history of questionable behavior. I remember years ago there was a story that involved a prostitute that was going to be a witness against the police. She ends up floating down the river. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but there was this crackhead Scrappy that was Flint's most famous crackhead, because apparently she headlined Flint Journal at 49 misdemeanors as on a record in a very short period of time. 49. But she was killed in the parking lot of a liquor store, and the local community's perspective is that she had seen something and was eliminated, because otherwise she was just an annoying crackhead. So the stuff that's gone on with me 2013 up into 2017, it shows that there's been a connection. And when speaking of the sheriff and the prosecutors as being political offices, once again, it's a good example when you bring up the sheriff, because the sheriff is supposed to be like the law of the land. Like if a Flint police officer breaks the law, it really shouldn't be on the Flint police to arrest him. It should be on some other authority. And the sheriff, in a sense, is over them in that they can enforce the law of the land, right? So if like a politician or like that drain commissioner guy, I forget his name, Jeff, what was it?
Jeff Wright? Jeff Wright?
Yeah, Jeff Wright. He was an FBI informant, FBI snitch, got all that money on that project up north or whatever. And then, when the water crisis hit, that pipeline that he's funding all the way from the Bay out of the Thumb down to Flint, which is a ridiculous concept. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. This is the kind of shit that where when they created the board for that pipeline during the time that Weaver was in, and they were putting all these community people on that pipeline, nonprofit, or I forget, I have to look it up, but the bottom line is it was one of those examples, once again, where it was against the State Incompatible Public Offices Act, where you cannot work for the government and work for another agency like that, where you could possibly benefit from the seat that you sit in politically. So he had this entire board led by Jeff Wright that was in violation of the State Incompatible Public Offices Act, and the sheriff is one of those people that can go, oh, hey, you know what, that's against the law. We can arrest you for that, get you charged. And
Well, one person, now you bring this about people calling out other people and, in the political, our leaders or our elected officials.
Yeah.
John Gleason has called out the county commissioners on a couple occasions about something, like expenditures that he made that he didn't agree with. And I that's gutsy. And he's a Democrat, and I have a hard time saying that. But
Yeah.
John, I've actually
wasn't he
talked to
also
him.
in Congress, though?
Huh?
Wasn't he also in Congress?
Yeah, I think for years, and then he came back to a local.
So he's got a little bit more experience, kind of a heavyweight in a sense, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
because he's, and another thing, I think he wants to basically see something change. Now, some people have, and there could be something lurking in his background I'm unaware of. But dealing with him, talking to him, I talked to him on the phone a couple of times. I was encouraging him to come in and talk about stuff on a regular basis. It's never materialized yet because I didn't follow it. Then this COVID thing is going on, so I haven't pursued it. But another thing is too, I'd like to bring out to people that if you think you live in a nice safety net, you're beyond all this reach of bad law enforcement. I think you're being very naive because the bad officers can be in the suburbs, can be in the rural areas.
Right.
Matter of fact, I have stories I'll tell you later about like people out in far-flung areas of Genesee County, Shiawassee County, back in the 70s and 80s were very abusive. But back then we didn't have webcams, we didn't have multiple cameras in your car.
Camera on your phone, right.
And another thing is, people want to say, they roll their eyes when they hear about these abuses. And then they say, well, how is that possible? I think now we're just seeing just a tiny portion of what went on before the advent of the uprising of the new technologies.
Right.
Could you imagine a lot of this stuff brought to light 60 years ago?
Right. Oh, definitely. My own personal experience, like years ago, I was on my way back from California, and I was coming up, I think, 75 from Detroit after like a 3-day drive, and this fucking cop sorry about my French, in Monroe County pulls me over, and I only had like $80 left to my name, just enough to get gas money and food to make it back home to Flint. And the dude took $50 from me and said he wouldn't, and wrote me a ticket and let me go about my way. And then I go down to deal with the ticket back in Monroe County, and I'm just like young and stupid, and I'm like, well, Your Honor, I paid him right then and there. And the judge is like, what are you talking about? But of course, the cop didn't show up for the ticket, so it got dismissed. But he took $50 from me. And if they're gonna do that without a camera, way back then, that's minor. That's so minor. Imagine what, like you say, what they've gotten away with for decades. Standing on people, planting weapons, planting drugs, whatever it is. It is Hollywood in that sense. It's just not Hollywood in the sense that they're all a bunch of beautiful people running around with blonde, platinum hair and nice lipstick and all that. Actually, most of them are pretty ugly as far as I've ever experienced. But, so it's like a stark contrast as far as the visual aspect.
Now, see, there's local cops here in Flint that I never had to deal with as being like the one being pulled over or being stopped, or they're having like an issue with me. And they seem like affable, decent people. And I think if I were a cop, I would want to get rid of the bad apple because I think you're doing this, and there's a possibility, as much as we don't really want to admit it, they're doing a dangerous job. At times it could be a dangerous job.
Sure.
So,
but that's not a carte blanche a pass
no,
on everything else. I don't know. let's be idealistic for a minute. If we like defund the police and change how they are, then it should almost be like an institution of higher learning. Like they should be required to have better than a GED. They should be required to live in their community so they understand their community. But then like we form exactly how they're educated and how they're to enforce law, in such a way that you have to treat people with dignity and integrity and respect. And you can't just sit there and chuckle with your little tattoos on your fat, muscly arm and your meat head without any, care or perspective on the community that you're working in. You know what I'm saying? Like, then it could be like an institution of higher learning, not just law enforcement. But instead we have a bunch of apes running around with weapons, for the most part, abusing their authority any chance they get. And I think most of it's out of apathy. Given they, on occasion, do face intense situations, but at the same time, remember, they're only first responders. People forget that. They call them that. They want us to respect them, especially for the COVID-19 thing going on right now. But at the same time, they're not protecting and serving. They're responding. They're not involved in the community. They don't get what's going on, and a lot of times they just don't care. And in the case of what's happened to my mom recently, that we'll get into on a different show, where I can show you 2 police officers that absolutely did not want to do their job on what amounts to a felony, and now we have to chase down the detective and make sure that it gets enforced. It's absurd. But anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought. Sorry.
So, no, I think that I think a lot of people are going to oppose, and there's, I have questions too about a person who is not a lawyer becoming a prosecutor. But, okay, for example, I'm going to play the devil's advocate maybe, so I'm not trying to be like going after you. But I know the first thing they're going to say is, how are you going to know what would merit prosecution? I mean, what criteria would go by?
Okay, well, there's the obvious, any kind of sex offense that's serious, and murder, armed robbery, things like that. That's why I said earlier, typically a prosecutor likes to fluff up their image whenever some kind of high-profile murder or something takes place. Then they're on the scene and they're going to enforce it, But at the same time, they also have discretionary powers to do lots of other things, plus investigative powers to do other things. But one of my favorite examples is they can decline to prosecute pretty much any case they want, for the most part, okay? I mean, probably even down to some of the more serious offenses. But my point is this. If you have sheriffs or police doing sweeps of neighborhoods for warrant searches and shit like that, and the vast majority of them a lot of times are about for child support, and the result is temporary incarceration just to get the jail its money because they held somebody there for 72 hours, and the sheriffs get their money in that sense too from what they do. But in the end, it just causes people more trouble and it costs the public itself more. It's more of an expenditure on the public when we do that. When the reality is we can't hold these people for any length of time because they're minor offenses, and it would be unfair and it just wouldn't work as far as how much the population in the jails are already overcrowded. So if the sheriffs want to go out and do warrant sweeps, the prosecutor can say, well, don't bother, because all you're gonna do is run them through that part of the system, but we're not gonna prosecute them. So we can't hold them, especially with the COVID-19 thing going on right now. They're gonna crowd all these people in on a bunch of minor offenses, and that's just like one way where a prosecutor can sort of act as an activist to affect the system, and like how they don't like judges to be activists in that sense. It's like if they don't prosecute a bunch of cases, then it kind of nullifies the law. You know what I mean? It doesn't get rid of it, but it nullifies it in the sense that because it's not getting prosecuted, then the question later can be risen among the people from that action. Well, what is the point of this part of the system then? Should we change it? Should we reform it? Because the whole child support system is a whole other discussion that we could have that's just corrupt and detrimental, destructive to families. The whole 9 yards. There's a better way that could be done as well, but there's parts of all of those laws that I believe are either corrupt or just a misuse or abuse of power that if even stopped temporarily for any period of time, because I'm in office and I can have the discretionary power. Oh, and how would I know? Well, for one thing, if I save the salary that I would get and use it to spend it on the people that I want to have there in that office to act as advisors, or the legal teams that I get to choose that operate that office, because essentially the prosecutor sits on top of a pod of a whole bunch of other lawyers and prosecutors and paralegals and advisors. So you'd already have the staff that exists there that's been there for a long time, plus whoever you want to hire in. And if I could instead use my salary to do that and hire certain advisors that I would like to have with me as I operated that office, then there's plenty of ways to be sure you're doing your job. You know what I mean? Especially with the resources available to the prosecutor's office. You have the court administrator, you have the whole library there, and that team. You know, it would be more fun to just show up with a coffee and, you know, just help decide some of the bigger, loftier decisions about how that office operates. You know, drug offenses. Go down the list. There's a whole bunch of things that they could just not be doing that would be beneficial to the community, and the focus would be on the heavier issues. You know, and you would just see a difference within the community once that started to happen.
Well, to Leighton's credit, he's actually pretty. Should I say? Trying to find the word for it. He was actually pretty amiable towards the marijuana issue. He was also for or against, you know, and so that's a big selling point though. Even when you're seeking
yes
re-election.
and no. I mean, once the wave is coming and you already see it coming, I guess if you want to
it's
jump
true.
on it, you know.
I mean, it's true, but then when the laws change, it'd be ridiculous for a prosecutor to maintain trying to prosecute under the old standards. So I mean,
right.
Maybe, but I've also found out but he was agreeable to it before it was a change in the law. That's my understanding. And also in situations where a person defends themselves in their homes, he hasn't sought out like a vigorous persecution or prosecution against them. So that's what I think is a good thing, because if somebody's in their house, you know, given some kind of situation could alter that, my opinion. I think if you're in your own house, somebody breaks in, you pretty much are obligated to defend yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I don't want to see a
Absolutely.
prosecutor who will go after you for that.
Right.
So, I mean, those are two things right there that I think are plus sides for Leighton. But,
I mean, I guess, you know, if somebody's defending themselves in their house and there is no argument to prosecute against them, I think it would work against him for anybody that would vote for him that's, any type of constitutional, person at all that understands their constitutional rights in that aspect of it, you know. If there is actually any population out there that thinks that way enough to vote for him, you know.
Right.
I mean, if he did start cracking down on us, on things like that, or maybe with the mask thing, we haven't seen that either with COVID-19, where they're running around trying to, you know, and so like they are in some places, like finding people for not wearing masks and things like that. I think it's one of those things where it would just like hurt him more if you prosecuted him than not, you know,
Right.
and just to leave it alone, because clearly his office has had no problem trying to destroy me. 7 years, 20 felonies, I beat them all, not guilty. You know what I'm saying?
I would not want you to have your legal bills.
Well, you know, actually, I've been quite fortunate because of my career and activism and people that have known me. I've been able to make friends with quite a few attorneys that have either advised me or, in a few of these cases, represented me for no fee at all.
So that's good.
Yeah,
That's very good.
So, but in the sense of the civil rights case, once we win our appeal, which we will, they're going to take their 33% or whatever.
Right.
Because I'm not taking any money for that case. It's been 7 years and an ongoing process of conspiracy to do something to me and force me off my property now out in Montrose. So there's no way in hell I'm going to not make them pay for that when I win. And that just leads into other stories later on down the road, because this isn't the only lawsuit that I'm going to be conducting. There's at least 2 or 3 more that are in the works and on their way.
Now, what if you're successful in your writing campaign and you become the prosecutor, though? How are you going to handle these cases now? You know, the ones that you're trying to pursue now.
I guess the moral thing and the legal thing would be is not to be involved, other than to be a witness to. I wouldn't even try to begin to use that. But again, it just illustrates that what I've experienced, I would rather have a prosecutor's office that would be open to listening to these issues. Oh, these cops did this to you. And instead of going, yeah, we're going to go headlong, and because the 3 felonies from this 2013 case was they tried to say I had contraband attempt to bring into the jail, and resisting arrest from the video that we saw at the beginning of this segment. Those are it was first off breach of peace, and then when I got out, and a year later they tried to charge me with those 3 felonies, which were totally just thrown out. They were quashed, because clearly I didn't resist, and I didn't have any weed on me. So, and even if I did have any weed on me, it wouldn't have been contraband because I was medically legal at the time before it was recreationally legal. So, those are 3 felonies right there that, the prosecutor could have said, well, it wasn't even breach of peace, so why are we going toward these 3 felonies? Totally wasted the office's time, resources, whatever and I had a public defender for that, so that's public money that went into that to defend me. And thankfully, I got lucky and had got one of the public defenders that pretty much did their job and knew the law well enough that they could say, first of all, he wasn't drinking, he wasn't intoxicated, so the breach of peace immediately is thrown out, because there's certain criteria under breach of peace that you have to be, intoxicated or drunk or something in order to be charged with that. And on top of that, obviously I was just filming the police and putting my commentary out about the corrupted neighborhood individual, having ripped off my family. There's no breach of peace there, at all. I mean, you can speak out. That's the whole point. They work for us. They don't have to like what we say. And I've told cops this plenty of times, and they hate to hear it. But it doesn't matter. I can tell you, fuck you, you're a piece of garbage, because that's my right. That's our right. If I don't like you, I don't have to be nice to you just because you have a badge. If I think you're a dipshit, you're not doing your job, then you have to sit there and listen to it. That's the point of your position. You work for us, period. That's not a cliche statement. You work for us. And I can't wait to show the video of how they treated my mom over her car getting ran into July 4th on a felony hit and run. 2 weeks after, and we finally get a crash report. But the video shows exactly what we're talking about. This is like minor form of corruption that has long-term intrinsic effects on the community. In that case, my mom's an elderly person, 65 years old, doesn't have a van now, and the person that ran into it and then ran off is going to get away with it again, probably. On top of the fact that that's just a horrendous crime. You hit somebody's vehicle and leave. So doesn't that also make the police potentially involved with like covering up a felony case, or is it just the fact that they're lazy and they can get away with having the discretionary power not to enforce something that they know happened, that they were told by the sister happened, hit and run?
The sister of the drunk driver.
Right.
Okay. Another thing is too. I'd like to point out though that people are going to object to this by saying, well, Flint's really beleaguered. I mean, there's only so many cops per shift, which is a valid recognition of that. That's a reality. But I've seen this happen. Cops not wanting to do anything back in the 70s. We're at full. Almost luxurious conditions for the cops. I mean, they were getting overtime and all kinds of perks. We used to have a chopper flying around to help the cops out. So we had plenty of funds. And I just saw their unwillingness at that time to pursue things. And what I was going to say, and I'm going to go on a limb here, I wonder if the person who ran into your mother's car is related to a cop. Because that's usually what happens here.
Or knows
in
them.
Flint.
See, that's what's funny is I'm not sure because the cops are black and they're primarily a white family. So, but I mean, of course, that's always possible. But the sister at one point did mention that the cops knew her or her family for some other reason too. Plus, her boyfriend apparently got stabbed in the back some years ago at the same place where they reside now, and so the cops are aware of that group or family for some reason too. So there's something there. You're right. There's probably something there on top of the fact that Officer Tuttle just was a lazy piece of garbage.
Well, I don't know if you want to go into his name right then, but
sorry. Well,
yeah.
I mean, the way he treated my mom, I'm kind of sorry about that. It just it incensed me the night it happened, and then it was disgusting. Two weeks later to have to argue and fight until we finally talked to his lieutenant to make him do his job. And he did come back with his tail between his legs and very quickly handed over a card with a crash report number on it and left because he didn't want me to videotape him again.
Well, see, the thing is, I don't understand why a cop would be. I mean, even if they can't pursue it was unknown. Say the person who crashed in your vehicle was unknown. They would have to realize, for insurance purposes, for other things, a person would have to have a report validated by going through the police.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know why they're reluctant to, and they've done that to me before. I had a theft happen, and the cops wouldn't even give me and I went downtown, and they wouldn't even file a report for me.
Right.
So I mean, I'm just tired of putting up with them myself. I've had stuff stolen from me after that. I don't even bother.
Right.
I don't even bother talking to a
That's
cop.
what they want. That's exactly what they want. If it's not something that they have to get directly involved in and point.
I don't want them around me. I don't want to deal with their
their
attitude because I'm tempted to I'm tempted to take a swing at them.
Right.
Because they're so indifferent, so flippant, and so arrogant, and so snotty to you.
Wait till you see these videos.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, I get tired of it. I get tired of them. And I'm looking at, well, why the hell am I paying taxes to go pay for your salary?
Yeah,
I might as well get a
drive around and drink McDonald's coffee all day and do nothing. Exactly.
And they're just, and the thing is, I think.
But again, I think it goes back. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it goes back to that thing I said about the Hollywood thing. So many people have it in their minds. These like Back to Blue and all that they can do no wrong because they wear a badge. Now wait a second. You've already seen even from the fictional Hollywood shows how they relish and revel in the fact that they have their little corruptions and blue line agreements and protections of each other and stuff like that. Law and Order, it's all over the place. You know what I'm saying? Watch that show again if you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Like the very idea, even from fictional stuff, that this kind of stuff doesn't happen, you're not just naive, you're downright stupid. You know, like where do you get off thinking that at all? You
When I
know,
was a
like-
kid, I was in Cub Scouts, and they took us down to a tour of the city police department back in the 70s. And I remember one time the cop was telling us how they do a lineup. And they'll get people who they think they picked up around that area. You know, the crime was been accused of said to happen. And they pick up people, and they also take a cop who's in plain clothes, street clothes, and put him in the lineup. And I said, he said that way they can contest the veracity or the accurateness of the description.
Right.
And I remember raising my hand. My mom was groaning on this because she thought I was embarrassed. I went, well, what happened if the cop was the one that did it? And the cop didn't want to deal with that. He just slipped right past that. And I mean, look
That's
at
great.
that in L.A. They had that gangs division, Ramparts division.
Yeah.
Okay, and they showed that came out, and finally they got convicted. These officers for doing it, planting evidence.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Doing all
It's
kinds
like-
of bad stuff.
That's what I'm saying. Whether it's fictional or not, we know what happens. You know, if you're watching NCIS or whatever, I mean, come on. All you're really there is to watch the boobs and butt running around in the cute outfit. Because, I mean, it's just a game, but they also revel in all of those things that we're talking about. And they try to present this, like, beautiful people image of the police when it's actually a lot uglier and everybody knows it. But it's because they're the police, it's, like, impossible to even, dent the issue. Unless somebody gets killed or hurt really bad, and then the whole world's in an uproar. Well, these are long-term intrinsic issues that need to be addressed, and you're never going to get it from the vast majority of the people that want to call themselves prosecutors. They're just
By the way, I'd like
sharp
to offer
lawyers,
offer this chance too. If the officer we so far already aforementioned, I guess, if you have a friend or family member who overhears this and they tell you about it, we'll extend the time to come in here and talk to you about your role in it. But
Absolutely.
I just want to be more, like I said, more journalistic than the journalist. But
Absolutely.
another thing is too, I like to point out is that when the cop talks to you, you don't really have to talk back to them. You comply with them. Now, if they want ID, I would give them ID. But Michigan, if you're just walking down the street
I'm
and
not
they come
sure
pull
how
you
that
over,
works for
this is not a
Michigan.
stop and ID state.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not. So
I
they
wasn't
can't
sure
ask for
about
that.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not giving legal advice, but I say comply, over comply, because it's not, but you don't have to respect them.
Right.
You don't have to respect them because that's a personal thing. Like I want to
Well,
put your
and-
picture on my wall.
And that's,
No.
again, an example of the kind of abuse that we're talking about. I mean, like, if a cop stops you and wants your ID, and if you cop any kind of an attitude, they think, and they get away with it, because they're a cop, even if you don't have to, you have to anyway. And how do you fight that? How do you, and there's no point in fighting it in that face-to-face, you just comply as best as you
Right,
can.
because this
and
face-
a lot of times you end up being just, screwed because that's just how they're going to be.
I say,
you know?
I don't like doing that because it goes against every fiber of my body as a free person.
Absolutely.
But
Oh.
comply because let's face it, they got tasers, they got pepper spray, they got a gun, they got
Threat of
5 cops
violence.
that'll show up to beat the hell out of you.
Threat of violence or screwing up
comply
your life
'cause
somehow,
they don't like to be challenged.
Right.
They get into that role, it seems like, and this is my personal
Right.
opinion, they like to be obeyed. I mean,
That's it.
basically, and if you really like that, you shouldn't go to law enforcement. You and your wife, or you and your partner, or whatever, should get together and
Yes.
have that S&M stuff in your own bedrooms.
Right.
Because I don't want to be part of that. I don't really want to deal with you.
Right.
Okay, unless you got a concrete reason to tell me why you're asking me where I'm going,
Right.
just pass by. You can wave. I might wave back. I just don't want to really engage you on a personal level.
Well, and again, this is too also where like, don't get me wrong, because the black thing, I'm all about it. The stop and frisk and driving while black, and I see it all as clear as day as what they would state about it, complain about it, or whatever. But let's not forget that there is also the other populations in the country that deal with a similar thing. Now, it might not be as acute as we understand it because of what's going on in recent history and with video and all that. But the rest of us experience it too. We need to get on the page of it's not just about black, but it's about that issue, period. You know what I mean? Like you said, and I would do the same if I was stopped and in order to present ID, unless I had like an entourage of cameras and people there to document and intimidate the cop with that weapon that the people have. You just comply because you don't want to get your ass kicked or get a ticket that's going to tie you up for 30 to 45 days over some dumb shit, Yeah, so, I mean, those things have to be addressed because we're not going to get any kind of real reform until the movement steps beyond the headliner mortality rates that the police produce by abusing their power. This minor stuff is just as important and in many ways on a larger scale. Whereas one person dies, 50 people have experienced what I've experienced. You know, had half their life torn apart over some crap that it never should have happened. Period.
Well, the new thing is, that's a thing that a lot of people overlook the fact that your contact with law enforcement is going to cost you money, going to cost you time.
Right.
Guess what? They got your tax dollars supporting them,
Right.
and now you got to find additional funds to
Right.
combat them. So you're supporting yourself, and you're
Yeah.
supporting them.
Right.
And that's a double. That's
You're
a double
you're paying
whammy
your
on your
abuser.
wallet. What?
You're paying your abuser.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great way of looking at it.
It's crazy.
And they got deep pockets because guess what? There's a lot of other people that they've got a gun held to their head in the form of taxes
Right.
and taxation
Right.
who can do this to you. They can harass you.
Right.
They could take your property. I mean, there's very little difference between the government and the mob. Very little difference between the two.
100%. Again,
Yeah.
which is why it goes back to like, why wouldn't I take a salary? Because I don't want it. I don't need it. I'm not going to be bought or paid for by anybody. I got a perspective. I want to express it. I think it would have a benefit to the community, save us money, save us time, save us effort. And if I can use that position to do that, I think I would be more appreciate the adoration of being written into history as being able to affect some kind of serious positive change like that. I would enjoy that more than any salary you could give me. You know, if I could say, well, you know what, there's like 3,000 rape cases that we've never looked at. Let's start looking at them.
Right.
And let's take my salary to do that. If we can produce 50 test results or 100 test results out of, what does he make? I don't even know what he makes. Like,
Oh, it's 80, 100,000 a year.
yeah,
better.
that's around
Yeah, probably.
100,000 a year. Well,
Yeah.
well, how many rape kits will that pay for? Let's do that.
Right.
I'd love that. You know, and if they're not degraded enough and we can actually catch people, there you go. You know, but I also like to side note on the rape and the sexual abuse thing, is I've experienced many times, many of my friends that have had girlfriends that were a year or too young, just under the statute limit, right? But because their parents didn't want her dating him or whatever, it was more an issue of their parents trying to be vindictive and get even with this kid than them actually being a pervert or a pedophile or something. I mean, if you're still like 18 and she's 15, you know, I mean, what 15-year-old guy wouldn't love an 18-year-old girlfriend? You know what I'm saying? But how often would say like a teenage boy's parents be jumping down the throat of an 18-year-old girl and calling her a molester? You know what I mean? Like, you're only talking a year or two's difference among teenagers. These are not pedophiles. These are not rapists in that sense. And I've known plenty of people who have been prosecuted for that and end up having that screw up their life for the rest of their life as a sex offender because they were literally 1 to 2 years of a difference with their girlfriend. That's overzealousness in enforcing certain types of parts of the law like that. You know what I'm saying? So
this was the 1940s. I can understand maybe having that the strict demarcation point.
right.
But I hate to break the news to people, but they're in the process in the 60s and 70s. There's this thing called the sexual revolution, feminism, and guess what? These girls are not these sacred vessels you got to protect anymore.
Right.
They're not. They're supposedly anyway. Right. I guess what they fought for is to be able to make decisions, and I can't really make a issue with that because I think they should be able to make those decisions.
That's right. Freedom is freedom.
I mean, it's like so. We're talking to you though. It reminds me though that there are some very thorny issues that are not so easy to cover over and gloss, and they're not so easy to make a decided pronouncement that's going to settle it for once and for all.
Right.
And so, like I encourage people again, if you have issues with what you heard here, please contact us. And if you want to be in the room with us,
Yeah,
you know,
we can talk.
if you want to,
Be great. I said, yeah, we could talk. It'd be great.
Yeah.
You know.
because I don't think that I don't want to build a wall and say it's us against you. Where we're going to go from there? We're not going to eliminate the police, and I'm not for defunding the police.
Well,
I'm for defunding the possibility to become militarized. I don't want them to have tanks.
No, yeah.
And rocket launchers.
I mean, I'll
but-
agree that we're not progressed enough to get rid of them entirely, but I do think that there should be a very serious effort toward changing, like, how they operate in the community.
Right.
You know, instead of being bulldog. I mean, because the classic, you know, punk rock anarchist, you know, perspective, which is true, is that they're just ready to batter your heads in on a good night, and if they can get a bunch of drunks and get away with it, you know, that's just the way it was, and the way they'd still like it to be, and that's, you know, something that's never really been dealt with. That needs to be eliminated from it entirely, you know, and they do need to have, I mean, again, ideally, we don't need them, but I'm not going to sit here and base my campaign or what I can do on a lofty idea like that that's outside of probably the period of my
I'll disagree
life.
with that because I don't think that humans will ever I don't even like using the term evolve, because that's a biological term basically,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's applied to humans, and I don't necessarily mean evolution is actually advantageous for existence, but it doesn't mean it actually makes it the most livable
Right.
for everybody else if you're not outside of that group who's got those attributes. Okay, so it's a real thorny thing right there. But I just think that we could do is address it. I advocate for not defunding the cops, training cops better, which is going to require more funds.
Sure.
But I think the government's got very few things it should have oversight on. One is law enforcement. And fire protection, fire services, firefighting services rather.
Sure.
And those things should be better funded. The other things like their ancillary or I think show no improvement kind of like social programs should be largely eliminated.
Yes.
But I think everybody should be able to have a good public defender. You shouldn't have to seek outside counsel and a huge drastic cost to yourself and your
Right.
family.
Well, especially if you're going to have a prosecutor's office that's paid and got a huge staff
Right.
and can decide whoever they want to prosecute.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's
No,
just
see,
a
I think
total
that's-
unfair advantage on the south side of the state.
As a libertarian, I think there's very few roles that the government should fill, and I think those things should, when they do fill those roles, they should have the funding to do that to the utmost ability.
Right.
And I think DNA testing should be done in all cases where it's available and it's pertinent.
Right.
I think that better representation should be available to all people. Better compensation for those people who are defending the
Absolutely.
accused.
The guy
So-
that did the public defender for this case, the public defending for this case on the 3 felonies, and I know it was very simple and easy for him because he was a very good lawyer and he already knew just the details of the breach of peace that they tried to cite was easily thrown out. We didn't have to go through an extensive amount of time to get him thrown out. I didn't even show up for court. He filed, they got thrown out. That guy did his job very quickly and efficiently, and that's the way it should be. They should have at least adequate defense against this monolithic prosecutor's office. Which is why I'm saying, once again, I'm just going to use rape cases as the example for the time being. But if you take $80,000 or $100,000 each year and apply it to the cost of getting some of these rape cases processed, that would make a huge difference without ever having to try to touch legislation to defund or reform the police and how they act or any of that
Right.
shit. Just right off the bat, with a wave of the hand and a sign and a signature, you could get these things rolling that would have a massive effect in the community, you know what I'm saying? And go after actual offenders instead of people that aren't really doing much of anything.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So,
Since it is selective enforcement and selective prosecution, use it wisely.
Yeah,
And but
exactly.
anyway, we got to wrap this up because we're
Sure.
getting close to 57 minutes, 58 minutes. So,
All right.
but we're going to do this. Could be part of an ongoing,
Absolutely.
conversation, I think. But
yeah, we'll see how this develops.
Adam Gerics for write-in for prosecutor attorney of Genesee County.
Genesee County, that's right.
And
Let me-
where can they seek you out so they can maybe question you or?
Well, for the
Donate.
time being, I'm gonna remain in the dark on that one.
Okay.
Because I have a couple of Facebook pages and websites that I'm working with that I'm going to use here in the very near future. But for right now, I guess they can call in here. I see a number here. I don't know if we ever do it live, or if they
don't
can,
do too many, but
or
they
if
can contact
make
us
some
through
comments
Outpoints
that we
TV,
can,
Facebook.
or if they can if people make comments or questions that we can answer,
Right.
later, that'd be cool. But
Right.
for the time being, I guess direct your comments here, and just to be clear and concise, my name is Adam Gerics, Adam G as in George, Erics, and it's a hard G, Gerics, but it's a write-in candidacy, so my last name is especially important to remember. And end corruption, like I said, we need to end corruption, and I'll do it. I don't need a paycheck to do it. I'll do it just for the fun, just for the fun of changing the paradigm and doing something positive for the community.
It's always interesting talking to you, and I hope we can get more of a continued basis going on now.
Absolutely.
And but you had a lot going on you had a lot on your plate. So nice talking to you though. Finally though.
Yeah, well, I can just note this if it's not too long. It's been 7 years, and I've had to sit and wait and let these court cases pass. So, anyway, we can sign off.
Okay, have a good one then, and come back again. Okay.
Yeah, I will. Thanks.